Welcome back to EB Insights, the podcast for anyone who is responsible for developing or promoting their company's employer brand. On today's episode, we speak with Tiffany Pedersen, who is the head of global employer brand at Amazon, Alexa Devices and Services. Today, Tiffany talks about her extensive experience in consumer marketing, which is actually her background, and how she has really parlayed that into a career in employer branding, including the tactics and the measurements and some of the ways in which she really embeds consumer marketing practices into her employer brand function. I think this discussion was so insightful, and there are a lot of great insights for anyone who is really looking for that kind of impact and measurement, especially to share with key leaders about the powerful impact your employer brand tactics are having. So I think you're going to really enjoy today's episode, and welcome Tiffany to the podcast. Welcome back to another episode of EB Insights, the podcast where we talk to employer brand, HR, and talent acquisition leaders to really discuss hot topics in the world of employer branding, employee engagement, and the employee experience. Today, I am super excited to have a friend of mine, Tiffany Pedersen, who is the head of global employer brand marketing for Alexa Devices and Services at Amazon. She's also an accomplished, dynamic, and passionate marketing leader with extensive years experience building brands and driving marketing that delivers business results. Prior to working at Amazon, Tiffany led global employer branding for Marriott International. Her background is building consumer brands and marketing plans, and she has decades of experience at Capital One, the not-for-profit sector, and the ad agencies of New York. Tiffany has a lot of expertise in developing and implementing insight-led, integrated, omni-channel marketing plans, and today she's here to talk about lessons that employer brand practitioners can leverage from effective consumer marketing. Welcome to the podcast, Tiffany.
Thank you so much. It is my pleasure to be here, and it's lovely to see you again, Sandra.
You too. So, Tiffany, the reason I really wanted you on the podcast today is because I remember the first time when you and I started working together in the world of employer brand at Amazon. I really respected and appreciated the approach that you took to employer brand, which is really looking at it as a consumer marketing alliance in a sense, where there's so many tactics and there's so many lessons from that consumer marketing world that you were applying in the world of employer brand. So I thought you would have some great insights to kind of share, given your background wasn't in employer brand, which is really interesting. So before I start asking you some of those kind of questions around the marketing strategies, how did you go into the world of employer branding from your background?
Sure. Thank you. And I remember that moment that we met, Sandra, was sitting around that conference table in New York trying to figure out Amazon's employer value proposition together. So it's a great question, and I'm a guest lecturer at Georgetown University here in DC, where I'm based, and I get asked the same question often by the students. And one of the things that I love the most about marketing, Sandra, is that you can take it and go to different industries, taking all of your knowledge and your experience. Like I've done in my career, I've hopped from the world of banking to the world of hospitality. Now I'm in tech. I've worked in ad agencies. I've worked in not-for-profit. And that's what I love the most. It's fungible, right? So you can bounce around quite a bit. But I'm excited to talk to you today about how you can leverage just fundamental best marketing practices with you wherever you go. But I got into the world of employer brand marketing at Marriott International. And fun fact for everybody, it's pronounced Marriott like chariot, but the entire world says Marriott. So if you take nothing else away from you today, it is pronounced Marriott. But I moved from consumer marketing into employer marketing when this dream job at Marriott opened up, because I'm an avid traveler and I love exploring new cultures. And so the chance to work at Marriott was a chance of a lifetime. And so I pivoted into the world of employer brand for the first time then. That was about 8 years ago.
Oh, thank you. Well, thank you for the correction. That's actually our hotel chain of choice, and so we've
All
been
right.
multi-platinum members for years. So I will now have to correct my
Awesome.
husband every time he says we're booking a
Yes.
Marriott to say Marriott,
There
and
you
I know
go.
this
There you go.
for a fact. So thanks for that. So when we look at the world of consumer marketing and consumer branding, it really is about managing a reputation, right? So it's managing a reputation for your potential buyer. So very clearly aligned, employer brand marketing is about managing your reputation to a potential hire or a potential candidate. So what do you see as the most common strategies that you could use between the two? Consumer
Sure.
marketing versus employer brand marketing.
Sure. Sure. So I would say you're absolutely right. Like it's about managing your reputation, right, as an employer. When we talk about employer branding, the significance of it and the importance of it. Um, but it's the same as a consumer brand, right? So when you're trying to attract a customer, it's an emotional connection, right, that customer has with your brand. And it's the same thing as an employer when you're trying to attract the best possible talent to come work for you. It's that emotional connection they're going to have with your brand. So it's what does your brand stand for, right? That's where you always need to start. So that's in developing your value proposition. So on the consumer side, that's your consumer value prop. And on the employer brand side, that's your EVP or your employer value proposition. But both start with deeply understanding what's going to motivate your audience. So I was a psych major, and I just came out of career day at my kids' middle school, and I was encouraging them to go explore psychology because it actually is a great foundation before you head into marketing because it's all about how do you influence people. So it kind of goes back to, again, like who is your target audience, whether that's on the customer marketing side or employer marketing side, and how can you deeply understand your customer. So it starts with insights, it starts with data, it starts with it's one-to-one interviews, it's focus groups, it's a deep dive into truly knowing your audience and not just the superficial demographics, but really the psychographics, what makes them tick, what are their pain points, what are their motivators, and how can your value proposition solve that, right? So it doesn't matter whatever the widget is, whether you're selling a product or selling a job. It just comes down to fundamentally having a value proposition that is going to be compelling to your audience, solve a pain point. It's going to motivate them to want to buy or take action, or in this case, an employer marketing, right? Apply to your jobs, and it's having a val prop that's differentiated, right, from your competitors. So, what is your SWOT, analysis look like? Your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. You need to start with a competitive audit and truly understand what are your strengths and what are your competitors doing, and then making sure your val prop is authentic to who you are, right? It really needs to be ownable to who you are. And credible to who you are. So I'd say that really is fundamentally where you start with whether that's employer marketing or it's consumer marketing, but it's deeply understanding your audience and developing a strong value prop that you can then go take to market.
You raise such a really interesting point and actually very poignant right now for me as well, which is when you discussed with your kids about taking psychology classes or understanding how to read people and understanding how to get kind of under the skin of key motivators. And it really is something that I don't think is talked about enough. Honestly, in business in general, you need to understand how to read people, how to motivate people, how to sort of understand what sits below the skin so that you can get to that sort of desired outcome, in a way that's authentic and almost be 3 or 4 steps ahead of the road. And it's funny because, as you know, but the audience doesn't, I have a daughter who's graduating high school and starting college. And when she said to me, she didn't know what she wanted to do for a career yet, which I think when you're 17, most people don't. But she said she wanted to do some kind of a degree in psychology and something else. And my immediate reaction is psychology. I'm like, what are you going to do with that? Like be a therapist? Like, is that really what you wanted to do? And,
Right.
I was kind of thinking where are you going with that? And then when she started to kind of explain why, it's very similar, which is really understanding how the human brain thinks and how people are motivated. And it was really insightful from my daughter to me. And I think it's a really important point of what you're talking about, just when it comes to, we talk about the personas and developing those personas,
Right.
so that you develop
Exactly.
strategies towards those personas. It's such an important point that probably
Right.
isn't talked about enough.
Tell your daughter I'll talk to her anytime about a degree in psych. I loved
Yeah.
it. But-
Obviously, I should have said either way.
But you're absolutely right. I mean, remember, like, marketers sometimes make the mistake that thinking that they're the customer for your product, for your job, whatever it is you're trying to sell or influence, right? You are not the customer, right? So I also say that it takes empathy, right? Like, you need to see, like, you need to put yourself in their shoes and become your customer, because you are not your customer. So, but that is fundamentally what is going to set yourself apart as a marketer. And when you're creating that val prop for your employer, it's deeply understanding your audience. So we used to have an expression in my ad agency days. So shout out to Roberts Communications, where I started my career in upstate New York. It was acquired, so it's no longer known as Roberts. But I learned from one of our art directors there. His name was Mark Fisher. Maybe he'll be listening to the podcast. But we used to have an expression, garbage in, garbage out. Meaning, like, it starts with that really strong creative brief or strategic marketing brief, where you don't fundamentally know, like, who your customers are, what's going to motivate them, what are your competitors up to, et cetera, then you're not going to have a strong product in the end. So yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah, no, that's 100% right. So another sort of, as we think about consumer branding, consumer marketing versus employer brand, you talk about sort of the customer experience, right? So the customer experience, if you're in consumer marketing, would be whatever your product is. If you have a store, it's their experience when you're in the store. If you sell things online, it might be their experience on a website. When you're talking about employer branding, it's more of the candidate experience, right? But it's also the employee experience, because employer brand is, if it's authentic, it's being lived internally and externally. So can you talk a little bit about how you would sort of think about the candidate and employee experience when it comes to employer branding, again, sort of borrowing or leveraging those techniques that you use on the consumer side?
Sure. It's a great question. And I'd say it definitely starts internally first, right? So before you can take anything externally, you've got to evangelize it internally first. And again, whether that's on the consumer side or employer marketing side. And I think it's thinking through that entire experience. And again, it's got to be very authentic to who you are as a brand, but how are you going to pull that value proposition through, not just through messaging, but to that entire journey, right? So we talk about on the employer brand marketing side, what it takes to attract the very best talent to your brand. You're out there with the marketing campaigns that will drive them then to your career site, right? So what does that experience look like once they hit your job site? Once they apply, looking all the way down the funnel, and what do all those interactions look like, and how are you keeping your candidates engaged and warm throughout the entire journey? So I think, again, there's so many similarities with the world of consumer marketing and employer marketing. It's looking at the entire journey, and now, of course, everything is digital, right? Everything has moved virtually. So paying close attention to that interactions and experiences on your site, whether that's your career site or your consumer site, and just ensuring that again, it feels consistent all the way through, consistent to your brand and what you are claiming to stand for, right, as a brand. So that's where every single touch point really matters.
And what, just for people out there who are thinking about that consistency, what do you think the key things are they need to look at? Like, what are the touch points that you think are some of those that tend to go wrong or tend to be those little red flags that might set a candidate and question whether or not they're getting the sort of authentic brand from the
Sure.
employer?
Sure. So again, a great question. I think, again, it's making sure all of your internal stakeholders are bought in and understand what your value proposition is along the way. so that everything can be consistent. So as an example, as marketers, we're out there pushing marketing to the candidates, to the most attractive talent to come have them apply to our brand. At the same time, we're arming our talent acquisition recruiters, in this case, the world of employer marketing, with talking points that are consistent to our val prop that we've learned from talking to hundreds and hundreds of our candidates and our own internal employees. So it's talking points that we know are going to resonate, that matter most to candidates when they're looking for jobs. It's everything from things like, simple tactical things like a signature, right? So like as our recruiters are reaching out to candidates, like what is it that they're conveying, that message, that visual, even in like their email signature? What does their LinkedIn profile look like, right? So that's a key place where we know candidates are searching for jobs in many of our industries. So what does that look like? And then from there, what is your social media outreach, for example, look like? And is everything consistent and ringing true to who you are as a brand and what you're declaring as your value prop? So I think it's just a close collaboration with the marketers and your quote sales force. So in this case, it would be with your recruiters.
Yeah, and I think that further sort of reinforces the importance of launching an EVP internally first, because it really should have been built from the ground up by your own employees if it is authentic. And if you're launching it and getting the employees sort of, singing the same tune and understanding and living and breathing this EVP, then those talking points aren't as much of a struggle, right? Because it's something that, it might be the way they frame it, but it should be authentic to their experience.
Exactly. It's authentic. Hopefully everybody is bought in, understands the why, like why the value prop has landed where it has. And it serves kind of dual purpose too, as you're getting your own employees excited and jazzed about your value prop, you're strengthening their engagement and their retention and their experience, right? So it really also serves as this golden thread, if you will, or universal thread that can unite and excite your own employee base, as well as get your candidates or external customers excited too.
Yeah, absolutely. You also brought up social media and making sure that messaging is consistent. So, it reminds me of the marketing rule of 7, where a potential buyer of your product or service needs to see something 7 times before they're willing to make an investment and make a purchase. So if you apply that same philosophy to a candidate, they would need to see that message 7 times before they might investigate potential opportunities at your company, because that's a huge commitment. So again, that sense of consistency would be even more important in that sense, because if they see 7 different messages or even 4 different messages or 3, is that really having an impact to their buying behavior, which for them would be going and looking for open roles. So what do you think are some of those ways that employer brand practitioners or recruitment marketing leaders can implement that rule of 7 in their strategy?
Sure. Love this question, Sandra. It's so important because so often I think some of our stakeholders are trying to help, but they'll suggest or throw out a tactic that they think they need without coming to us as strategic marketers and saying, hey, this is the goal or objective that I have. How can marketing help solve it? Because often, I would say most often, it's going to be a multi-channel integrated campaign that you're going to need versus like a one-off tactic. And it's exactly what you just said, that rule of 7. And I have to tell you, in the world of employer brand marketing, I've heard that it's actually threefold, up to 21. And that's because the decision to purchase something like a product, let's just say a pair of shoes or whatever it is a much different decision than when you're taking on a new career. And so
you could always return things easier than you can change your career.
Exactly. This is a big decision when you're going to apply for a job and take on a new career. So it's all of those touch points together that is going to influence your candidate. So it's understanding who they are, what media they're consuming, when and where and how they're making those decisions, whether to purchase your product or in this case, apply to a job. But it takes time. It takes time, and it takes time for the campaigns to ramp, right? Since it's all machine learning, and the more data that you have with your campaign, the better it's going to perform. And so, it's important. It's the multi-channel campaigns that win. And I think we've seen time and time again with our test and learn strategies where we think we're getting the most conversions from a campaign, from a single channel. If we double up the investment in that channel and take away the investment in an upper funnel channel that's more about building awareness, for example, it influences your conversion performance. So they do work best hand in hand, and it's a synergistic effect. So I'm a big fan of multi-channel campaigns. You're creating almost a surround sound, right? For your customer or your talent, whoever you're trying to attract. So it's a great question.
Well, I think one note here that you touched on is when people come to you. So this is people in the business that see an urgent need they have, and they want to throw something at it to attract talent. So maybe it is a huge hiring investment they need to make, or maybe they're opening up a new facility, or maybe they are starting a new product launch and they need to get a certain number of hires very quickly. And I think it reinforces the line almost that employer brand leaders need to take around just pumping stuff out to get your name out there versus doing it in a unified way where that brand is extremely consistent. Because I think one of the things that you don't want to happen is that with a very short-term need, you're creating something that's almost feels different and not as closely related to the larger brand picture that you're trying to create, and it could almost damage that, right? You're almost cannibalizing your brand. I mean, right. I know we saw that a lot at Amazon, because Amazon's a very big place, and we had many different divisions, and they all hired a lot of the same type of people. So it is a little bit of a concern, that cannibalization with those messages going out this way, this way, this way, and this way, because you have those urgent needs.
Sure.
What have you seen, and what recommendations do you have in that?
Sure. I mean, I think in that case, targeting is everything, right? And that's the beauty of digital too. Like if we're talking about offline advertising, it's mass advertising, it's harder to target, and you're reaching a much larger audience, casting a wide net, but intentionally. I think the beauty of our digital campaigns, our programmatic buys, is that it's extremely targeted. So even at a huge company like Amazon, where there's definitely some overlap with the talent that we're bringing in to the different Amazon divisions, because it's just such a huge base, the ability to target by region, by role, by level, that makes it feasible, right? But I would say, you're bringing up something obviously that's near and dear to my heart. But it's how and we're still trying to solve it today, like many companies are. When you've got such a big brand and such a big brand presence, how do you show up in such a consistent way, time over time? And I think that's something that all of us, I think, are challenged with. I think having a really strong master brand, if you will, and a master EVP. And then allowing your sub brands to be able to have their own ownable, unique messaging that can complement the master brand is probably the best way to go, right? Because then it can all feel integrated and coming from the same either employer or brand. Yet it gives the sub brands room to kind of have their own voice.
Yeah. And there's so many, as you said, there's so many companies like this. If you think about Diageo, for example, they have several different, liquor companies within them, right? Johnny Walker, Smirnoff, Jose Cuervo, Tanqueray, etc. So those are the brands that consumers know. But the overarching Diageo brand is the employer brand that you need to have that sort of level of consistency, but yet the uniqueness that each of those sort of sub-brands have. And so it's very similar. You think of Alexa, you think of devices, you think of, it is something that sits within its own thing. But then but then as you bring it up through Amazon, then there's this whole huge umbrella
Right.
over it. So that, again, that alignment is important. It doesn't feel like it's totally different, but there does have to be some uniqueness when you go into
Exactly.
those different divisions.
Exactly. And I think
Yeah.
that's what makes it fun too. It's like that's the strategic piece of figuring out how are you going to align to that master brand and how are you going to carve out, space to go after your audience in a unique way, right?
Yeah.
I think that's a lot of fun.
Absolutely. So I want to switch gears just a little bit and talk about investment when it comes to employer brand. It is something that most people in this world struggle with, which is how do I continue to advocate to my leaders that this needs ongoing investment and that investment doesn't necessarily align to our hiring needs. So it's not going to fluctuate like this. There has to be that always on brand, that always on investment, and the sort of struggle that some people have. So recently, in LinkedIn's 2024 Future of Recruiting report, employer brand was ranked as number 2, just under the quality of hire, as topics that are going to shape recruiting over the next 5 years. I think that's amazing news that it's ranked number 2,
Agreed.
and just under quality of hire, which is kind of amazing. Why do you think that so many recruiting pros are ranking this so high when it comes to the future of recruiting?
Yeah, yeah. Well, just to piggyback on what you were just saying about how long it takes to move the needle on a brand reputation. This is not something that happens overnight, right? So to your point around having always on marketing, storytelling, who you are as a brand, that's really important because there are many research studies that just show that it's a long tail game, right? That moving the needle takes time, and this is not just in the space of employer brand, but of any brand. And so I think when we think about the future of employer brand and why so many recruiting pros have ranked it as so important. I really think that COVID changed things, and I think that the pendulum swung. And I think, we've seen in 2021 the Great Resignation. Last year, we heard coined, or actually as early as 2022, we heard coined, silently quitting. I mean, I think that COVID really caused people to stop and reflect on what's important to them, and then suddenly, with everything shifting and everybody working from home, and then that becoming the norm, now suddenly people are being asked to come back to the office. So it's that transition and just what does that new norm look like, that hybrid. And I think that candidates are now a bit more choosy, and culture really matters. I think what you stand for as a brand matters. Your values matter. And people make decisions to purchase something based on what the brand stands for. Even though part of that is a subconscious decision, you don't realize, you're buying something because of that emotional connection to that brand, but you are, right? We know that it's not always just a rational decision, but a very emotional decision. And same for when you're choosing a job. And what is that employer doing in the community? How are they treating their employees? What do they stand for? What are their values? What do I know about them as an employer, not as a consumer brand, right? But what do I know about them as an employer? And that's why I think so many recruiting pros have ranked that so high, is that we've got to put a lot of intention into ensuring that our reputation and our perception is the story that we want to tell and that we want everybody to know, right? That takes a lot of intention. So like one of my favorite brands that I always hold up as the gold standard here is Patagonia. So just a plug for Patagonia, because everything that they do is about sustainability, right? That's what their brand stands for, is helping the planet. And people are attracted to that, whether you're going to buy your next jacket or whether you're going to go work for that company, right? So it's a big decision for folks when they're looking for a job, a career, in terms of like what, so I should say, it influences their decision in terms of like what your brand stands for. So I think, in my opinion, that would be why it was ranked so high, because people aren't just choosing a job for compensation or benefits. There's so many other factors now, and they can afford to be choosy.
100%. It's funny. I was actually at my daughter's volleyball practice last night, and I was speaking to another mom about Chewy, the online pet supplies and pet food thing. And we were talking about, I had heard a couple of times, and she had also experienced that when unfortunately her pet had passed away, Chewy had sent her flowers and a condolence note, and then on the anniversary of her dog's death had sent her an anniversary note. And she immediately said, I would love to work for this company because of the way they treat their customer, who was a customer that wasn't going to be a customer at least for the foreseeable future since they didn't have a pet, but the appreciation that they had and the sympathy for something that anybody who has had a pet knows, you know, how hard it is. But you're right, it was kind of, you know, that is a situation where I would spend more money to shop at Chewy because I've heard these stories about how they treat their customers. Whereas I might get it cheaper somewhere else, but not have that sort of warm, fuzzy feeling. And that's and if I'm thinking that from buying dog food, when it comes to a career, you know, there is a whole emotional connection you really have to make with your potential candidate to get them to make that investment.
Sure. I mean, hats off to Chewy. Kind of goes back to our original conversation around knowing your customer, right? So, like, I'm sure that they've done a lot of research and talked to a lot of customers over time. And that touch point of reaching out to your mom friend in that time of need when she was in that place, feeling that sadness and grieving over her lost pet, getting that, you know, condolence card meant a great deal to her. And I'm sure there was a lot of thought and strategy that went behind that. That's just one example, right, of one touch point that they're reaching their customer in a powerful way. So hats off to them for really understanding like who their customer is and what's actually going to matter, right? Because I've seen it go to the other way, right? When like you receive something and you're like, ooh, that's not what I needed at this moment in time, or, you know, you clearly don't know me or, you know, who I am or what I need. So I would say hats off to them for having a good grasp on who their customer is and what matters.
Well, and it brings up too the point of advocacy, right? So I have heard this story from two separate people months apart from each other. They are advocates for this brand because of an experience they had. When it comes to authenticating your employer brand, you have to have advocates. So really quickly, just before I go to one of my last questions I want to ask you, what is your approach to advocacy? And what do you think is a best practice when it comes to kind of building advocacy within your own employees?
Sure. So, love this question. We launched a brand champion program at my current job, and even in my last. But these are volunteers that are in our org, in our division, that are just, they've gotten our message about our value prop and our brand and what we're trying to accomplish and what we stand for, and that we need their help to amplify our voice, and they just, you know, passionately want to help and be in that space. So we have a brand champion program where we're constantly recognizing those voices among our own associates who are helping us to get the word out when we have new product launches, or there's thought leadership articles or interesting, cool innovations happening. Here in Devices, we have our fall product launch that we all get really jazzed and excited about. But there's lots of moments where, you know, it's not always going to be a direct, you know, come work here, we're hiring, right, kind of message, but it's more about that always on constant stream of the exciting things that are happening here and the people behind them, right, that are constantly inventing here in this culture of invention. So yeah, we gamify it. We have lots of friendly competitions with our brand champs, but it's, I think, finding people that are passionate about it and wanting to kind of raise their hand and get more involved in the marketing space. But we've seen a ton of success with this. But I think that's the key, is having folks come forward and self-identify themselves who are already in this space. And then it's coaching them, it's guiding them, it's providing them resources along the way, you know, how to have a most effective social post, how to leverage our value prop assets, and all of our enablement tools that we create here for them. So it's just ongoing coaching and educating, but yeah, they are tremendously amplifying our voice. And if you think about it, it's the equivalent of paid media dollars, right? So we've got our own evangelists here at the company that are amplifying and broadcasting our messages and our voice is the equivalent of spending dollars in media. So it's a huge part of, I think, what makes our Valprop successful.
Yeah, and I think all studies will tell you that the most effective messaging comes from the employees and authenticity of that over even corporate channel, much less a paid marketing spot.
Absolutely. It's about,
so important.
Yep, it's about, and you think about your own stuff, the last thing that you purchased, right? And the ratings and reviews. You want to see what other customers had to say. You don't want to, there's only so much credibility you can take in an ad, honestly, right? And it's all about word of mouth. It's about the referral. It's about the ratings and reviews. Hugely, hugely powerful.
Yeah. So last question for you, which is, it is a heavy topic for a lot of us in employer branding, and that's ROI. So all of these things that we've talked about, the advocacy, the alignment of your brand, is so vitally important. Always on employer branding, so important. When it comes to the end of the day, or when it comes to thinking about investment in next year's budget and how you're going to advocate for that, what do you think is the most important ROI that employer brand practitioners should focus on?
Sure. Yeah, great question. This is my life. So also a question that's near and dear to my heart. I think what I tell my middle schoolers when I go to the career day is that to have a career, to be successful at a career in marketing, it's the creative and the analytics, right? The analytics is equally, if not more important, right? Like it's so much fun creating the ads, the videos, the blogs, everything that goes into producing the videos and all the creative aspects of marketing. But if you don't know how those are delivering value to the business, then what's the point, right? So what I always am educating and sharing with my leaders is that employer marketing leverages the exact same standardized metrics as consumer marketing. So we look at the marketing funnel. We know that we have to move down the funnel, right? Starting with awareness to consideration to ultimately get to your conversion. And I describe it as like you can't just ask someone to marry you, right, before you start dating them, right? So, we take all of those metrics really seriously. So starting with upper funnel, right? So what are we doing from a reach and impression standpoint? Like who is seeing it and are they the right target, right? Moving into consideration, what does the engagement look like? Your clicks, your shares, your views, your comments, etc. What does the traffic look like that you're driving to your site? And is it quality traffic? How much time are they spending on your site? How many? What's the percentage that are bouncing, and where are they going? There's so much data that you can collect. And ultimately, of course, you have your conversion point, which is, in employer marketing, it's your application. Did your marketing work hard enough that somebody actually converted and applied, right? And then it doesn't stop there, right? Because we need to know what happened after they apply, right? So was it a quality application and did it ultimately turn into a hire, right? And that's where you have to marry your marketing funnel data with your recruiting funnel data in this case. And in the consumer side, it's the same thing. It's driving that conversion point instead of an application is a sale, right? Did my marketing work hard enough that I drove a sale, and did I see a significant lift in sales? I think where it gets really tricky, right, is with the multi-channel attribution models that are out there. I think we know that marketing can influence somebody, and we've talked about how there are so many touch points, right, that you have to have out there in an integrated multi-channel campaign to convince somebody to take action, whether that's to buy your product, apply for a job, whatever it is. But many attribution models are last touch, meaning that last marketing ad, content, blog, post, whatever it was, is what gets the credit for that sale or that conversion, that application. But we know that the way that marketing works is that it's a surround sound effect where you're seeing it and you're hearing it in many places that are going to influence you to take that last action, right? So I think that this is like a challenge that all of us face as marketers is multi-channel attribution, and where are we getting the most ROI from which channel. There's lots of test and learns you can do, shutting off channels in certain markets and not others, and other A/B tests you can do to try to understand that. But that has to be part of your agenda. That has to constantly be part of your test and learn agenda. to understand your marketing ROI at all times. And I think employer marketers should be held and are held to those same standards and metrics as customer marketers, right? The other thing that makes it challenging is that we've talked about how long it takes to move the needle and change the perception of a brand. So in addition to those near-term metrics of a campaign that's in market that you're launching and you can optimize, right, week over week and see how you're doing, driving performance down that marketing funnel, you're also, doing the work to move the needle over time with how your brand is perceived. So at the same time, you should also always be measuring your brand sentiment over time. What do people think about your brand? And that takes a while to move. So that's something that rather than looking at, week over week to see how your metrics are, that's something that you should be looking at quarter over quarter, right? Because that's going to take a lot longer to move. But those are the types of ways that, we're looking at it. And again, it kind of goes full circle to what I said at the beginning. Is like, it doesn't matter if you're working in hospitality or tech or not-for-profit or within an ad agency space, wherever you are in marketing. I mean, that just needs to be part of your DNA, right? Is being able to produce the quality creative that's going to resonate with your audience, but being able to measure and evidence the value that it had, right, on the bottom line. So the combination of creative analytics, so important. Love this question. And I think there's always room also to improve in how we're looking at multi-channel attribution, right? There's a lot of different models out there. We're constantly looking to try to build dashboards here to automate this and get better at it. But it's so important, such an important topic, Sandra.
Yeah, and I think what you've hit on, which if anyone's sort of in the earlier stages of this journey, there's a lot of conversations with your internal stakeholders and agreements and alliances that you need to have. So you've made the point of, attributing your marketing funnel and the marketing assets with your recruitment funnel. So there has to be some alignment with your ATS. Obviously, there has to be some things in the back end where you can measure. When I very first started in employer branding back in the Stone Age at PwC, and it wasn't even called employer branding at that time because it wasn't really a job. Yeah. It was, I think we called it brand and marketing. We started as simply as going into new hires of the roles that we had the most, most amount of roles to fulfill. And within the first month or two of their new hire experience, quick little focus groups. How did you hear about us? What did you think about us? If you were somebody who was on campus, because at PwC we hired a lot of people on campus, who else were you looking at on campus? Who was the competitor? What did you know about it? Did you have friends that worked here? And for more experienced hires, what websites were you looking at? Was Glassdoor very influential? Was Indeed very influential? Just to get, and again, it's anecdotal and it's it's more qualitative than quantitative. But if you're just starting in this and you're trying to build those internal stakeholders and build those connections, these are great ways of the baby steps of getting started. Absolutely. So you can start to build that picture, especially when it comes to your point to omni-channel marketing, because you're not going to get all of the answers in one dashboard, but you're going to get a lot of indicators that can lead you into sort of that next step, which is how do you build that integration internally? So you actually aren't the only ones looking at this. You're working with marketing, you might be working with HR, you might be working with, all of these other resources to kind of pull this together and use it for different purposes, which is important.
Yep. Absolutely. Well, good for you for doing that right out of the gate in your first EV job.
Well, it's called not knowing what I was doing and thinking, well, I can talk to people. That I know how to do.
Absolutely.
Well, Tiffany, thank you so much for spending time with us today. I think all of this information is so valuable, and obviously you have an incredible amount of experience, and really appreciate your bringing that picture together for everyone who's listening on this podcast today. So we appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
I just want to say, thank you so much for having me. Great to connect again, and I've loved being here. So thanks for listening, and thanks I hope to see you again soon in person someday, Sandra.
Absolutely. Thanks so much.